The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty plaza of San Felipe, a heat that seemed intent on stripping the soul from men. But what choked the crowd was not the sun, but the heavy silence imposed by the presence of Mexican Colonel Ricardo Vargas. His men, in pristine uniforms and with vacant eyes, formed a cordon around an old barn, its doors bearing the Army's seal. Inside, the grain that would feed the town through the winter now belonged to Vargas, in the name of a law he had invented. That very morning, no one dared to breathe deeply, no one except for a man leaning heavily on an oak cane, his left foot dragging in the dry earth. Elias Sewell watched the scene, not with anger, but with an ancient sadness, the same he felt whenever he saw the Texas flag used as a doormat by greed. He knew what it was to fight for this land. His leg was a map of the Battle of San Jacinto, a constant reminder of the price of freedom. Vargas, pleased with the fear he sowed, mounted his black horse, an animal as arrogant as its owner. As he passed through the crowd, his eyes fell upon Elias. A slow, cruel smile formed on his lips. He stopped his horse. "Well now," Vargas said, his voice cutting the air like a blade. "A crippled dog barking for a bone it can no longer gnaw. Tell me, old man, what piece of you did Texas forget to bury?" His soldiers' laughter echoed, false and forced. The crowd shrank further. Elias Sewell, however, raised his chin. His eyes, clear and steady, met the Colonel's. "This land has a memory, Colonel," he said, his voice low but laden with the weight of 100 thunderclaps. "And it forgets neither heroes nor traitors." The insolence was too much for Vargas. He dismounted with a brusque movement, walked up to Elias, and with the tip of his boot kicked the old man's cane away. Elias collapsed into the dust, his useless leg folded awkwardly beneath him. The humiliation was public, silent, and absolute. Vargas spat on the ground beside Elias's face. "Texas's memory," he hissed, "will be what I decide it is." He remounted and rode away, leaving behind a fallen man and a town paralyzed by dread. As Elias rose with no one's help, the dust clinging to his clothes and his wounded dignity, a memory struck him. A flashback, not of battle, but of a campfire years earlier. A large man with an easy smile and a coonskin cap had passed him a canteen. It was Davy Crockett. "A man's strength, son," Crockett had said that night, "isn't in how fast he runs, but in the direction he stays on his feet, no matter the wind." Elias had ignored the signs. The stories of Vargas's brutality, the farmers who mysteriously lost their land, the justice that had become blind and deaf. He had believed in the promise of Texas, in the decency of men. That mistake of faith now burned him more than shame. In the distance, as the dust from Vargas's retinue settled, a warm wind blew from the west. It seemed to carry with it a sound almost imperceptible, like a name whispered among the cacti and hills, a name that would, sooner or later, make everyone tremble. If you believe humiliation is the end of the story, wait to see what happens when a good man's honor is trampled into the dirt for which he bled. Elias Sewell's humiliation did not end in the plaza. In the days that followed, Colonel Vargas made sure to make him an example. Elias's small property, a modest ranch he had built with his own hands, was the next to be confiscated. The official justification was the same: military necessity. The truth was different. Vargas wanted to break the spirit of the man who dared to look him in the eye. Elias was evicted with nothing but the clothes on his back and his oak cane. The door to his home was locked, and 2 guards were posted at the entrance day and night, like vultures guarding a carcass. The colonel, secure in his impunity, held dinners in his garrison, where wine flowed freely and laughter echoed within the walls. On one of these nights, he raised his glass and toasted to the progress of Texas, free of its cripples and its useless memories. His officers laughed, and the story of the humiliated old veteran became a popular anecdote among the corrupt. Elias, now an outcast, slept in the barn of an abandoned church. The same people who once greeted him with respect now looked away. Fear was a disease, and Vargas was the vector. Elias tried to seek justice through legal means. He went to the local judge's office, a man whose loyalty was bought with the colonel's gold. The judge listened with studied boredom, flipping through papers with disinterest, and dismissed him with a wave of his hand. The lands belong to the army now, Sewell. It's the law. But Elias knew this was not law. It was tyranny dressed in the clothes of order. Every closed door, every look of pity or scorn, every cold night in the barn, all of it dug deeper within him. But it was not despair, he found. It was a cold, sharp clarity. Anger had transformed into purpose. One night, as the rain beat on the barn's leaky roof, he remembered something else Crockett had told him by that same campfire. They were talking about the Alamo, about the men who chose to die rather than surrender. "We don't fight because we think we'll win, Elias," Crockett had said, the fire dancing in his eyes. "We fight because it's the right thing to do. Victory belongs to God. Honor belongs to us." That memory was Elias's anchor. He wasn't fighting for his ranch. He was fighting for the soul of that land. The motivation was no longer personal vengeance, but the defense of a promise, the promise that the sacrifice of good men would not be in vain. He began to observe. He ceased to be the victim and became a shadow. Hidden in the darkness, he watched the routine of Vargas's guards, the patrol schedules, the messengers who came and went from the fort. He noticed a pattern, an arrogance that led to carelessness. The colonel's men, so confident in their power, had become predictable. One night, crouched behind some barrels near the fort, he saw one of Vargas's messengers meet secretly with a merchant known for his shady dealings. Something was wrong there. Military discipline was merely a facade. In the silence of the barn, amidst the smell of musty hay and old gunpowder, an idea began to take shape. A dangerous, silent, and patient idea. The colonel didn't know it, but by trampling that ranch, by mocking that man, he had just awakened. The soldier everyone thought was dead. Elias Sewell's plan did not rely on strength, but on cunning. Violence was Vargas's tool. His would be truth. He knew he couldn't act alone. He needed an ally, someone who also had scores to settle with the colonel and who had the courage to look death in the eye. He thought of Lillian Wallace Travis, a widow who had lived in seclusion since her husband, a captain in the army, died in a supposed training accident under Vargas's command. The town whispered it wasn't an accident, but Lillian had never spoken publicly. Elias went to her house at dusk, moving through the shadows. He knocked on the door, his cane firm in his hand. Lillian opened a crack, her face pale and suspicious. Upon seeing Elias, her expression softened with shared sadness. "I'm sorry about your ranch, Mr. Sewell," she said. "I know what it's like to lose everything to that man." Elias got straight to the point. "Mrs. Travis, I believe your husband did not die by accident, and I believe you know that." The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, Lillian invited him in. In the dim light of the room, she told him the truth. Her husband had discovered that Vargas was using military patrols to smuggle gold illegally extracted from indigenous lands, selling it to mysterious buyers across the border. He was gathering evidence when his horse stumbled near a ravine. Lillian, out of fear, had hidden the remaining evidence, a small ledger with dates, coded names, and values, which her husband had kept inside a copy of the Bible. It was the missing piece in Elias's puzzle. Together, they began to work in secret. Lillian deciphered the codes from her husband's book, while Elias used his knowledge of the fort's routine to predict Vargas's next moves. Their first small victory was subtle. Knowing the date of the next smuggling shipment, Elias used some of his remaining money to pay a young messenger to deliver a false order, forged in the handwriting of one of Vargas's lieutenants, diverting the supply wagon to a secondary route that passed through a swamp. The wagon got stuck, delaying the operation by 2 days and costing Vargas a considerable sum, in addition to stirring his fury. He punished his men, suspecting internal betrayal, never imagining that the mastermind was a crippled old man and a grieving widow. Hope, once a nearly extinguished ember, began to glow. They discovered, through the ledger, Vargas's final plan, one last large gold shipment, enough for him to abandon his post and disappear a rich man, leaving Texas behind. The delivery would take place in an isolated location known as Devil's Throat in less than a week. It was their chance, the only chance. They had the proof, but they needed someone with authority and courage to execute justice. The judge was corrupt, the sheriff a coward. There was only one name. Elias took a small piece of wood and, with his knife, carved the figure of a bear, a symbol only one man would understand. At the base of the figurine, he wrote the date, the location, Devil's Throat, and a single word, Vargas. He handed the bear to an old scout, a loyal man who owed Elias his life from the war days. "Go north," Elias said. "Don't stop until you find Davy Crockett's camp. Put this in his hands. Tell him the honor of Texas is at stake." The scout left that very night. The powerful men laughed, thinking Elias Sewell had given up, broken by the system. Little did they know that the silence was merely the sound of the hunter waiting for the prey to enter his sights. The morning of the delivery dawned cold and gray. At Devil's Throat, a narrow rocky canyon, Colonel Vargas and his most loyal men awaited the wagon with the gold. He was tense but exultant. It was the culmination of months of trickery and cruelty. In a few hours, he would be a free and rich man, and Texas would be just a dusty memory. The wagon arrived, heavy and slow. Vargas smiled as he saw the wooden chests, but as his men prepared to transfer the cargo, a sound echoed through the canyon walls. It was not a shot, but a voice, a calm, powerful voice that seemed to come from the very stones. "Looks like a fine day for business, Colonel. Pity the partner is the devil." From a rocky ledge above, a figure materialized against the pale sky. Tall, imposing, with a rifle that looked like an extension of his arm and an unmistakable coonskin cap on his head. It was Davy Crockett. Vargas's smile froze. Fear, an emotion he had grown accustomed to inflicting, now consumed him. His men took a step back, their faces a mixture of shock and dread. That man's name was a legend, and the legend was there, alive, before them. "This is none of your business, Crockett," Vargas shouted, trying to muster his arrogance. "This is military matter." Crockett laughed, a deep sound that reverberated through the canyon. "Military matter? I call it theft. I call it treason. I call it dishonor." Slowly he began to descend the slope, unhurried, each step firm and deliberate. He was not alone. On both sides of the canyon, dozens of farmers and citizens of San Felipe appeared, silent and armed. Leading one of the groups was Lillian Wallace Travis, holding her husband's Bible like a shield. Crockett stopped a few yards from Vargas. He did not raise his rifle. Instead, he pulled the small carved wooden bear from his pocket. "A good man sent me this," he said, his voice now low and dangerous. "A man you humiliated, a soldier who bled for this land while you only bled its coffers." He then narrated in detail Vargas's crimes, citing the dates and values from Lillian's ledger. He spoke of Captain Travis, murdered. He spoke of the stolen ranches, and he spoke of Elias Sewell, cornered, with the eyes of his own men now filled with doubt and contempt. Vargas made the decision of a coward. He drew his pistol and aimed it at Crockett, but before he could shoot, a figure emerged from behind the wagon. It was Elias Sewell. Leaning on his cane, he moved with surprising speed, using the oak handle to strike Vargas's wrist with tremendous force. The pistol flew and landed in the dust. The colonel, disarmed and defeated, looked at the crippled man he had scorned. There was no hatred in Elias's eyes, only cold justice. Crockett approached Vargas, but did not touch him. He looked at the colonel, then at Elias, and said loudly for all to hear, "Shame, Colonel, is not having a leg that doesn't work. Shame is having a soul that never has." He gestured to Elias, who picked up the wagon ropes and, with his own hands, tied Colonel Vargas's wrists. When the townspeople gathered in the plaza and saw the colonel being led away by a man he had mocked, no one cheered. They simply took off their hats in respect to the man who brought justice without shedding hate. On that day, justice in Texas was not the sound of gunshots, but the sound of silence and respect. Colonel Vargas's fall was as swift as his rise had been. Corrupt. With the evidence from the ledger and the testimony of dozens of citizens emboldened by Crockett's presence, he was tried by a military tribunal. Stripped of his rank, his lands, and his honor, he was sentenced to a life of hard labor. His punishment was not death, but oblivion. He who had lived to be feared and seen became a nobody, a ghost condemned to break rocks under the same Texas sun that had once illuminated his power. Elias Sewell had his ranch returned. The door that had been locked by tyranny was reopened by justice. He sought neither glory nor power. He returned to his simple life, to working the land, to the comforting silence of the countryside. But something had changed. The respect the town now held for him was deep and genuine. He had become a living symbol that courage needs not a perfect body, but an upright spirit. Lillian Wallace Travis, finally at peace, transformed her husband's old home into a school for the town's children, teaching them not only to read and write, but also about honor and duty. She and Elias became pillars of the community, their friendship forged in the fires of adversity. The justice they achieved was not just personal. It cleansed the air of San Felipe. Fear gave way to hope, and the Texan spirit, which had been bowed under the weight of corruption, rose again, proud and strong. Before leaving, Davy Crockett visited Elias at his ranch. They sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and red. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. "You reminded me of something, Elias," Crockett said finally, "that this land doesn't belong to whoever has the most strength or the most gold. It belongs to whoever loves it enough to fight for it, even when it seems lost." Elias simply nodded, his heart at peace. He looked at his extended leg, his oak cane beside him. The pain was still there, but it was no longer a symbol of loss. It was a symbol of permanence. Years later, the children at Lillian's school would ask about the legend of Davy Crockett and the corrupt colonel. But the elders, with a smile, would correct them. They told the story of Elias Sewell, the man who proved that in Texas, you don't need two good legs to stand tall. A man's true strength, after all, is measured by the straightness of his backbone. If this story about honor, courage, and justice touched your heart, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more Old West sagas. Share it with everyone who identifies with Mexican pride and the strength of those who fight for what is right. And don't forget to comment from which city or country you're watching. Your presence makes this community stronger. Until next time.